It was just supposed to be a quick stop, a 2-minute errand on the top floor of the tallest building in Manhattan, the kind of building where she didn't belong, where every inch smelled of wealth and polished marble and the air conditioning whispered through expensive vents like it knew it was above the rest of the world. Lily James, 22, scholarship student, part-time intern, soaked from a sudden spring rain, stood outside the executive lounge on floor 88, holding a soggy folder of documents that she had been told to hand-deliver before 8 p.m. She had no idea the room was monitored. She had no idea the most powerful man in the city would be watching that moment. And she definitely had no idea her life was about to change because of one very wrong decision. The door wasn't locked. The hallway was empty, and her shirt clung to her like a second skin, dripping rainwater onto the pristine marble floor. She hesitated just a second before stepping inside, thinking no one would mind. It was only a side lounge for executives, rarely used after hours. She had no plans to linger, just needed a dry place for 30 seconds to wring out her hair and wipe down the documents. Inside, warm light bathed the furniture in gold, and a leather couch sat silently by the wall like an untouched museum piece. There was no one there, not a sound, not even a hum from behind the tinted glass. She set the folder carefully on the counter, peeled off her soaked uniform jacket, then hesitated as she pulled at the edge of her shirt, shivering. Just for a second she thought maybe, just maybe, she could take it off and use the towel in her backpack to dry herself before putting on the spare shirt she always carried. The room seemed too still, too quiet. It didn't feel like anyone was watching, and she had no idea a camera tucked into the ceiling corner was capturing every movement in silent, high-definition detail, streaming live into a private feed accessible to only one person. Julian Black didn't often check the internal security feeds himself, not unless there was a breach or a threat, but that night something had drawn his attention. An alert pinged on his phone about activity on floor 88. Unusual for that hour. Curiosity made him swipe the screen, and what he saw made him stop breathing for just a moment. The girl on the screen wasn't a threat, wasn't a trespasser, wasn't even someone who should have been on his radar. And yet she was there, standing in the room like she owned none of it, removing her shirt with a kind of innocence that had nothing seductive about it, just desperation and fatigue, and something about that struck him. She had no idea what kind of place she had wandered into, no idea whose eyes might fall on her at that exact second, and still she moved like someone with nothing to hide, just a girl in a soaked shirt trying to survive another day. He should have closed the feed, should have deleted it, maybe even reported it as inappropriate access, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and then saw it. Something small just under her collarbone as she bent down to dry her hair, a faded tattoo, a symbol familiar, impossible. And suddenly everything changed. Julian Black was not the kind of man who chased ghosts or accidents, but in that moment, as he stared at her frozen image on the screen, he felt the strangest pull in his chest, not desire, not shock, but recognition, and the kind of quiet ache that only surfaces when the past crashes into the present without warning. He didn't know her name, not yet, but he would, and once he did, he knew there was no turning back, not for him, not for her, because that moment, that camera, that girl had just rewritten everything. Lily James never imagined she would work inside the kind of building she used to pass by on the bus, the kind with mirrored glass that reflected the clouds, the kind with guards who barely blinked but always noticed your shoes. She was 22 and 1 semester away from graduating with a double major in finance and social work, her resume spotless, her ambition unmatched, but her world so far removed from the wealth that surrounded her at Black Tower that she often felt like a visitor in someone else's story. Her life was made of part-time jobs, subway rides, and second-hand textbooks. But she carried herself with quiet dignity, never asking for more than what she had earned, never letting anyone see how close she was to breaking. Her internship at Black Group had been a miracle she couldn't afford to mess up, even if it meant late nights and endless coffee runs. Her apartment in Brooklyn was barely more than a shoebox, the wallpaper peeling and the ceiling sometimes groaning from the neighbors upstairs, but it was hers, and that mattered. She had no family to run to, no safety net. Her mother had disappeared when she was 15, and Lily had spent most of her high school years bouncing between shelters and relatives who didn't want to keep her. Still, she made it, scraped together a life from part-time tutoring, financial aid, and a stubborn refusal to give up. Her dream was simple: stable work, maybe enough to help kids like her someday, not luxury, not wealth, just safety. Meanwhile, Julian Black lived in a world so different it might as well have been a separate planet. 35 years old, self-made billionaire, known for taking over his late father's empire and reshaping it into something leaner, sharper, more ruthless. His face rarely appeared in media beyond business magazines, and even there he was a mystery. No verified social media, no romantic scandals, no interviews longer than 10 minutes. He wore tailored suits like armor and moved through the city like he owned it, because in some ways he did. His name opened doors, shifted markets, and made people nervous. Yet beneath the cold exterior was a man haunted by silence. His mother, Evelyn Black, had died when he was 16, but not before shaping the most important parts of him. She had been a nurse, warm and kind, the only softness in a childhood of sterile boardrooms and impatient tutors. Julian still remembered her hands, the way she smiled at strangers, the way she wore a simple chain with a symbol etched into it, a symbol now forever inked into his memory. She had founded the Black Hope Foundation, dedicated to healthcare access and education for the forgotten, but when she passed, his father let it fade, and Julian had spent the last 10 years quietly rebuilding it under the surface of his empire. The Black Group itself was a giant, spanning everything from tech to biotech, but its heart, according to Julian, was always going to be the human side, the side his mother had built with love and vision, and now it was his burden to carry it forward. He ran the company like a machine, but guarded its soul like a soldier at war. Few knew that beneath the contracts and acquisitions was a project very personal to him. The construction of a hospital in her name, a promise he had once whispered at her gravesite, a promise that he had never told anyone, until the girl on the camera appeared. She didn't know it yet, but her presence in that room, that accidental moment, was about to unravel something buried deep in his past, because the tattoo on her skin was not random. It matched exactly the symbol from his mother's pendant, a sunburst with an open hand, a mark that had been designed by Evelyn herself as a sign of hope. It was never sold, never replicated, never shared outside of one secret project she had run just before she died. Julian had tried to track it down for years, to find the last recipients of her personal scholarships and nursing aid programs, but the records were incomplete, wiped clean after her death, and now here it was, inked onto the body of a girl who had no idea she had just become the center of a very private mystery. He didn't know if it was coincidence or fate, but something told him he needed to know who she was, what she wanted, and why she carried his mother's mark like it had been there all her life. So the next morning, without telling anyone why, Julian called his head of HR and gave an instruction that raised eyebrows but received no protest. "Move intern Lily James from archives to my personal team," he said calmly, effective immediately. No one questioned him. No one dared. And Lily, stunned and confused, began her first day as the personal assistant to the most powerful man in the building, unaware that her life, like the tape she didn't know existed, had just been rewound, paused, and was now set to play in an entirely different direction. Lily didn't understand why she had been reassigned. No one explained anything. The HR email was formal and brief, simply stating that she had been selected to assist directly in the CEO's department on special internal initiatives. Her old supervisor congratulated her with a strange look, equal parts envy and confusion, and by 9 a.m. sharp, she found herself standing in front of a matte black door on the 91st floor, a floor most interns never even got to see, much less enter. She adjusted her blouse, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and told herself not to be intimidated, even though her heart beat faster than it ever had before. She knocked once, lightly, expecting a receptionist or an assistant to appear, but the door opened instantly, and there he was. Julian Black stood in front of her, not as a man on a screen or a figure in a magazine, but as a presence that seemed to fill the entire space. He was taller than she expected, broader too, with a sharpness in his face that made her stomach flutter. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his forearms, and he looked like someone who had never once lost control of anything in his life. Yet when he looked at her, there was something unreadable in his gaze, something that unsettled her, made her feel exposed without knowing why. "Miss James," he said in a tone that was calm but carried weight. "Come in." She stepped inside, careful to keep her eyes on the floor. The room behind him was quiet and sleek, a blend of dark wood, glass, and soft lighting. There were no assistants, no noise, just the sound of the door closing behind her and the quiet hum of the city below. He gestured to a chair by his desk. "Have a seat," she nodded, sitting carefully as he walked to the other side of the room and picked up a folder. Her hands trembled slightly, and she hoped he wouldn't notice. But Julian noticed everything, especially the way she tucked her chin when nervous, the way her hands moved quickly but gently, like someone used to carrying more weight than they let on. He handed her the folder and explained her new role. She would be assisting him directly on a confidential project involving the reorganization of several philanthropic divisions, including health, education, and accessibility services. Her eyes widened slightly, and she hadn't known the company did that kind of work. He smiled faintly, watching her surprise. "It's the part we don't advertise," he said. They worked in silence for hours that first day, and though he said little, Julian found himself distracted by her presence, not in the way of attraction that came too easily in his world, not lust, but something quieter and far more dangerous. She didn't ask questions she shouldn't, didn't flaunt ambition like so many others had, but what really disturbed him was how natural it felt to have her in his space, and the strange pull that twisted deeper every time she looked up and smiled politely, like she didn't know what she'd done to his peace. Lily, for her part, tried to focus, tried not to think about how close he sat or how his voice dipped low when he spoke directly to her. She had dealt with powerful men before, professors, donors, mentors who always wanted something in return. But Julian was different, distant but never cold, observant but never invasive. Still, she felt the tension rising with each passing day, not spoken, not touched, but electric, as if something was humming between them that neither dared name. One afternoon, 3 weeks into her new role, she found herself alone in his office. He had stepped out for a meeting, and she was organizing files on his desk, when the tablet on the table lit up, displaying the security app. The screen flickered and opened a folder titled Level 88 Lounge. Her hand froze over the desk, her heart dropping. It was the night she had gone upstairs to dry off. She could see a thumbnail still of herself, frozen mid-motion, her shirt halfway off. Panic surged through her veins. She backed away from the screen like it might burn her. When Julian returned minutes later, he knew something was off. She was pale, her eyes downcast, and her voice had lost its steadiness. He glanced at the desk and saw the screen still glowing, and in that moment he knew the secret was out. He moved quickly to close it, then turned toward her. "Lily," he said softly, but she was already backing away. "You saw it," her voice cracked. "You watched it." He opened his mouth to explain, but no words came, not yet, and she shook her head. "Why didn't you delete it?" His silence was too long, too loaded, and it broke her. "You made me feel safe here," she whispered, turning away before he could answer. She didn't show up the next day, or the one after. HR called but got no reply, and Julian, for the first time in years, felt helpless. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was something else. The look in her eyes when she asked why he hadn't deleted the footage, because the truth was terrifying even to him. He hadn't deleted it because it was the first time in years he had felt something real, and now that feeling was tied to her in ways he couldn't undo. By the end of the week, he tracked her down through a friend in legal who owed him a favor. She had returned to her old department, quietly, trying to disappear into the lower floors, as if none of it had happened. He went there himself, against every protocol. And when he found her by the file cabinets, she flinched at the sight of him. "Please don't," she said. But he didn't speak right away. Instead, he handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a signed affidavit. "The file is gone," he said, his voice low. "This is proof." She looked at it, then at him, her eyes brimming with hurt. "Why did you keep it in the first place?" Julian looked at her then, and for the first time dropped the shield he always wore. "Because that night," he said, "you reminded me of someone I thought I'd never see again." She frowned, confused. "Someone I loved," he added. "My mother." The words shocked her, soft and heavy in the space between them. He explained the symbol on her collarbone, the connection, the impossible coincidence, and as he spoke, her anger faltered, replaced by something more fragile, more dangerous, understanding. But that didn't mean trust was repaired. Not yet. Not easily. Still, she met him halfway, agreed to continue working with boundaries, and slowly they found their rhythm again, except now every moment was thick with things unspoken, every brush of hands too long, every glance too honest. One night, while reviewing blueprints for the new hospital wing, their fingers touched over a page. Neither moved. The room went still, and Julian whispered her name like a confession. She looked up, eyes wide, searching his face for a sign, and then he leaned in, not recklessly, not arrogantly, but gently, like someone afraid of breaking something rare. Their lips met briefly, questioningly, and when she didn't pull away, the kiss deepened. Not hot or fast, but slow and careful, like two people discovering something they didn't think they were allowed to want. When they finally broke apart, Lily whispered, "This changes everything," and Julian nodded. "It already has." But the next morning she didn't come to work again. The next morning, Julian waited until 10, pacing his office like a man haunted by something he couldn't define. The desk remained untouched, the tablet powered off, and her absence filled the room louder than any noise ever could. By noon, he had called twice and received nothing in return. By 2, he had left the office altogether and found himself once again in the elevators, descending to a world that no longer felt like hers, but still beat with the memory of her voice, her scent, her hesitation. Lily had taken sick leave, according to the administrative assistant, no further detail provided, her files marked inactive for the week. Julian stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched by his sides, every fiber of him screaming to let it go, to step back, to act like a CEO and not like a man unraveling at the seams over a girl he had known for less than a season. But he couldn't, not anymore. Because the deeper he searched, the more things stopped making sense. 3 days passed before he learned the truth, not from her, but from someone unexpected, a woman named Caroline, head of legal compliance, who had been reviewing archived employee records at Julian's quiet request. She entered his office with a manila folder and a strange look in her eyes. "You said you wanted everything we had on Lily James," she said slowly. "Well, you might want to sit down." And then she opened the file. Julian listened without interruption as Caroline explained the connections, the hidden layers behind a girl who'd come to them under the radar. Lily James had transferred into the internship program through an obscure educational fund, the Marion Rose Scholarship, one of the dozens his company supported, quietly through legacy endowments. But this one was different. This fund was established years ago by his mother, the very same mother whose death had nearly broken him, the same mother whose symbol now lived faintly as a tattoo beneath Lily's collarbone. "She was part of your mother's last funded cohort," Caroline said gently, "back when the scholarship was still being run personally, before the foundation changed hands." Julian's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice low. "It means," Caroline continued, "that Lily might not be here by accident at all. He spent the next night reading through the documents in that file, handwritten letters from his mother to the scholarship recipients, records of home visits, medical notes, and one photo, yellowing and worn, of a young girl standing next to a woman with warm eyes and kind hands. His mother, and suddenly, everything tilted, everything cracked open. Lily wasn't a stranger dropped from the sky. She had been part of his story long before he knew her name. But she didn't know. That much he was sure of, because when he confronted her the next day, finally finding her sitting alone in Bryant Park, head down, sipping coffee from a paper cup, she looked up and flinched at the sight of him, not with anger this time, but with confusion, as if unsure whether to run or speak. "You found me," she said softly, and he nodded, sitting beside her. "I needed to," he replied. "I know who you are now, Lily, not just the girl on the camera, not just the her brows furrowed." "What are you talking about?" And so he told her everything, about the scholarship, about his mother's letters, about the photo he'd found of her as a child, standing in the garden of his old family estate, her face pale with shock as she shook her head slowly. "I don't remember that," she whispered. "I never knew." He reached for her hand, gently, not to claim her but to anchor her. "She chose you," he said, "even back then, before either of us had any idea where we'd end up." Tears welled in her eyes, not from romance or fear, but something deeper. Grief, confusion, awe. The wind picked up and carried silence between them, long and heavy, until Lily finally spoke again, her voice steadier than before. "That night," she began, "when I stepped into that room, I was just cold and tired and trying to survive one more day. I never thought someone like you would even notice me, let alone watch me." She paused, eyes brimming again. "But if I'm being honest, I think I've been running my whole life from who I was, from the life my mother gave me, from the parts I didn't understand." He listened without interrupting, letting her speak the truths she'd kept locked away. "My mother," she continued, "she wasn't kind, not like yours. She used me, sold things that didn't belong to her, including pieces of me, trust, innocence, everything. And I thought maybe if I got far enough, studied hard enough, I could build something different." Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "But when you saw me that night, it felt like everything I tried to bury came up at once." Julien's voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "You didn't deserve any of that." She looked away. "But I still let you kiss me, and that part scares me more." He moved closer, his presence warm beside her. "Do you think I kissed you because of the camera?" he asked. "Do you think that's all you are to me?" She didn't answer, and so he continued. "I've seen thousands of people pass through these halls, hundreds of faces I forget the minute they turn away, but you, I noticed you before the camera, long before the kiss, and now that I know everything, I still feel the same, only more certain." The confession hung in the air, unshaken, and Lily exhaled slowly, her guard finally beginning to fall. She looked at him then, not as her CEO, not as the man who held power over her job or future, but as a man who saw her in ways no one ever had, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running. But life, as it always does, had other plans. Because just as she stood and agreed to walk with him back to the building, Julien's phone buzzed with a message that would shake everything once again. A screenshot of the security footage, the original undressing clip, posted anonymously to a private board frequented by corporate investors and press insiders. The caption read, "Black's new intern," or "something more," and suddenly the air went cold. He stared at it in disbelief, jaw tight, every muscle tensing. "Someone leaked it," he said under his breath. Lily froze beside him. "What?" He turned the screen toward her and she gasped, a sound that cut deeper than anything he'd ever heard. "I deleted it," he swore. "I signed it. I made it disappear. But someone had made a copy. Someone with access and someone with motive." Julien acted fast, pulling her into his car and calling his legal team on the way. The next 12 hours passed in a blur. shutdowns, calls, meetings, damage control, and PR spin. But the damage was already done. Her image, blurred but unmistakable, was out there, and though he fought to take it down, the wound had been made public. Lily didn't speak for the first few hours, didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat silently in his guest room, curled into herself like the child she used to be, and Julian watched from the doorway, powerless, until finally, just before midnight, she spoke again, voice low and hoarse. "I trusted you." And the words nearly broke him. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm going to fix this." "How?" she whispered. "It's out there now. They'll all think I got this job because of that." Julian stepped into the room, knelt in front of her. "Then we show them the truth," he said. "We show them who you really are, what you've worked for, what my mother saw in you, what I see in you." She stared at him, eyes wet but fierce. "What if they don't believe it?" His answer was simple, certain. "Then they're not worth our time." And just like that, the truth was no longer a burden. It became a weapon, one they would wield together. The next morning, he scheduled a press conference, standing beside her as she read a letter written by his mother years ago, a letter naming Lily as a protégé, a girl worth investing in, worth believing in. And for the first time, the crowd saw not a scandal, but a story of survival, of grace, of second chances. And through it all, he never let go of her hand. Days blurred together after the scandal broke, and the press conference felt like rushing through a storm. Lily and Julian remained at the center of impossible scrutiny. Every headline questioned her integrity. Every tweet tore into her confidence. But instead of turning away, Julian stood beside her, unwavering, completely barefooted. Because he wanted to show his hands had nothing to hide. The moment of confrontation had passed, and now there was a reckoning. Lily returned to the office, still haunted by every glance that followed her, by every whispered speculation in hallways. She slipped into meetings, trying to focus, but found each task mirrored the storm in her mind. Julian had asked her to be part of this, to fight with him, but the cost of standing beside him felt like every bit of control she had ever earned was being tested. Julian, on the other hand, felt the boardroom shifting beneath him, investors questioning his judgment, colleagues murmuring about nepotism, yet none of it deterred him. The leak was clearly from inside his inner circle, yet whenever he tried to trace it, he ran into walls of silence, patterned deflections, elevated denials. It was stabbing at his confidence more than any public smear. One afternoon, as Lily was locking up the office, she found Julian waiting by the elevator, his face tired but eyes razor-sharp. Door closed behind them, and he led her to the conference room, a small space with glass walls into the city beyond, and he closed the door so no one could overhear. Here, he told her, the leak had been traced to someone very close to him, someone he had trusted, someone who had manipulated documents before ending the relationship. That person had faked the copy of the footage, added dates and captions, twisted it into something it was never meant to be, editing it to ruin them both. Lily recognized the name he mentioned. It shocked her more than the video months ago. She had believed in coincidences, but betrayals were different. Betrayal was deliberate, cruel, and ruthless. And right now, both of them were dealing with an ache that went beyond headlines. It was deeper. It was personal. He looked at her and said he had to fire that person, but that it would expose them further in both their lives. She looked at him, eyes wide. She didn't want more sacrifice. Not for her sake, but he shook his head and said she was worth it. They made a pact. They would stand together, no apologies, no hiding, all of it out in the open. Yet he couldn't stop wondering if his mother would have approved. Meanwhile, Lily found herself volunteering more passionately than ever at the Black Hope Clinic. She could feel her fears recede when she was serving children, supporting new mothers. She felt her heart heal as she saw that the world could be generous even when it was cruel. In office meetings, Julian began publicly acknowledging her contributions. He credited her with policy proposals, scholarship initiatives, clinic outreach. He built her up as more than an intern, yet every public compliment felt like a double edge because she still heard the whispers. One day a reporter confronted her outside the building, asked pointed questions about why a billionaire CEO would choose her, asked if she had signed any private contracts, asked if she regretted being part of the scandal. She paused, looked him in the eye, and said she regretted nothing, and pointed out she was not his trophy, she was his partner. Today they described their relationship aloud for all to hear. Journalist paused, then asked Julian what he thought. He stood behind her, arm wrapped around her shoulder, his voice steady when he answered, "I saw the tape because I care about her. Not because I had any right to. I protected her, then I protected our integrity. I love her and I believe in her. She deserves to stand for something bigger than herself." Silence fell, then applause, cautiously arriving from a few onlookers across the way. It spread through the crowd like a wave, and the headlines the next day led with the word love, built on truth. Our work, however, was far from done. The board meeting arrived with cold efficiency. Investors gathered, rows of suits poised, ready to vote. Julian showed them the evidence. He laid it out, fact by fact, motive by motive. But the deal-breaker was the last line. He spoke instead of begging forgiveness. He simply said, "The only thing you should worry about losing is your humanity, and if you cannot see her value, then you are free to walk away with my share of your votes." They voted no to removal, and the boardroom erupted not with support but surprise. Few had ever seen him this passionate, this vulnerable. Afterwards he found Lily packing up, consumed with doubt. She feared he had made a mistake drawing attention. She thought she had been saving something, but instead she had broken something. Julian reached out, kissed her gently, and said, "Our story is bigger than fear. It's built on choices, and you chose to stand with me and I with you." That night they walked arm in arm through the city, the lights reflecting in their eyes. She realized feeling his hand in hers felt like safety for the first time in years. The city noise faded until all she could hear was his breath and the steady beat of her heart. The next morning, they stood together at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new hospital, named Evelyn Black Center Hospital. Parents, press, and patients gathered to witness something born from scandal, reborn into hope, as they dug the first shovel of earth together. Lily saw Julian smile with pride, but omitting not his gaze on her. That smile was not for the cameras, but for her alone. Later at the reception, they danced in the courtyard without music, just the wind and their footsteps. He whispered, "Finally, you belong somewhere." She touched his cheek and said, "With you," she believed it. But the chapter was not yet closed because as they raised their glasses, Julian said, "Everyone deserves a chance, not just to survive, but to thrive." And as he congratulated Lily, she reached again for his hand and they walked forward into a future written together. Julian and Lily walked into the next morning like survivors emerging into daylight after a storm. The groundbreaking had been cathartic, but it didn't absolve them of what came next. Working side by side to turn scandal into service felt like they were rewriting their own stories, yet they both sensed a turning point approaching. This was no longer about healing or redemption. It was going to test them in ways neither expected. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Lily received a call from an old mentor, someone who had guided her through scholarship applications and late-night essay edits. The mentor sounded excited and urgent. He explained there was an anonymous donor offering a full scholarship program, and she believed Lily was the one meant to lead it. Lily was surprised anyone remembered her identity beyond her internship, but the donor insisted confidentiality until paperwork was signed. The next meeting would reveal everything. It felt like another door opening, but spelled with the same uncertainties. That evening, Julian found her sitting at the clinic work table, reviewing folder after folder of student files. She looked exhausted, yet eager, as if the opportunity had re-energized her. He sat quietly and watched her write notes, match profiles, and sort resumes. He reached into his suit and pulled out the letter from the donor, inviting her to a meeting. Lily looked up, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and concern. She turned the letter over in her hands and said, "I don't know what I'm getting into." And Julian nodded and said, "You earned this not because of me, but in spite of everything you went through." She managed a small smile and said, "Thank you." The next morning, they drove together to the address on the letter, a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn, not far from her apartment. Lily felt nostalgic as they walked up the steps among old trees and late spring leaves. Julian squeezed her hand supportively inside. They were greeted by a woman named Claire Clark, who introduced herself as the donor and founder of a new nonprofit for women's education. She was warm and soft-spoken, and when Lily explained why she'd been selected, Claire leaned in and whispered, "I watched how you handled everything with dignity and resilience. I want you to help me do that for dozens of girls like you." Claire offered her the leadership role overnight, and when Lily looked at Julian, he nodded and said, "You belong there." At her acceptance dinner that night, Lily spoke of second chances and the power of kindness. She talked about the generational thread connecting Evelyn Black's legacy to her own, and she didn't mention the scandal, not once, but she spoke with conviction about why their cause mattered. But as their journey moved forward, an unexpected storm gathered strength at the heart of Black Group. Julian's CFO, a meticulous man named Robert Caldwell, had been growing frustrated with the reallocation of funds to philanthropy rather than shareholder dividends. He began tapping into the same private leaks that had once targeted Julian and Lily. He had hired a private investigator to dig into Lily's past. What he found was personal history, vulnerability stories of her mother's mistakes, financial instability, and rumors he spread. Next morning, a tabloid article hit the news. William Black's intern scandal. Scandal uncovered new details. Sources say she never should have been funded or hired by the company. The timing was curious. The story posted hours after the documentary announcement of Claire's nonprofit. Lily woke to the article alert pinging through the night. She read the headline and froze, the words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She had thought her past was behind her, sealed by degrees and hard work. Now it was splashed on every news site. This time the words were harsher. Rumors. She had been involved in a robbery years ago, a juvenile offense that didn't make courts. Her face looked unrecognizable in the politicized blur of headlines. Julian found her pacing her living room, phone in hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, heart clenched. He wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "We face this together, not because it's easy, but because you deserve better." The pain in her voice told him everything. "We'll fight this," he said, turning to his phone. He called Claire and every board member and the head of HR. The day became a whirlwind. Press calls, internal meetings, reputation, damage control. By nightfall, 3 executives had resigned pending investigation. 4 news outlets issued retractions and corrections. The tabloid front page had changed from accusation to apology in small print. But still, it felt like nothing was enough. Lily found herself asked to speak again, only this time it was not for scandal, then for trust. She walked into Julian's office and handed him a letter she had drafted. It read something like this: "I may be flawed, but my life is mine, and I won't let fear steal the future I worked for. Let it be public. Let's let the world see that a past is not a sentence, and that a second chance isn't a gift, it's a responsibility." Julian read the letter slowly and signed it together. They released it. The statement went viral, not as sensational gossip, but as viral wisdom. Almost overnight, they felt the tide turning. Weeks passed, and Lily's nonprofit scholarship program began receiving applications. Julian watched her read essays about overcoming abuse, poverty, addiction. He saw in her face the same determination that had first drawn him in. He realized their story was no longer about recovery, but about rising. Toward the end of the second month, armies of supporters gathered for a digital fundraiser broadcast live from Evelyn Black Center. Julian introduced Lily to thousands of viewers as the real architect of the initiative. He spoke of her courage, resilience, integrity, Lily stepped forward and spoke with calm strength about her vision to empower women through education and mentorship. She didn't cry this time, but there was no mistaking the emotion in her voice or the pride in Julian's unwavering gaze. After the fundraiser ended and the camera lights dimmed, he stepped up and said, "Now we leave the stage. What comes next is real." She laughed softly and replied, "And I can't wait to build it." He took her hand and said, "Me neither." That night they stood on the balcony of the penthouse overlooking the city lights, and he handed her an envelope. Inside was a first edition copy of her favorite childhood book, The Little Prince. His handwriting on the title page read, "For Lily, who helped me find his heart again." She paused and looked at him. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and she closed the distance between them and kissed him softly, saying nothing was ever written better than this moment. There are stories we read and stories we live, and for Lily and Julian, what they had lived was never meant to be a perfect fairy tale. It was jagged and messy, full of wounds and unexpected light, but somewhere along the way, it had become a love story that was real, a story not about rescue, but about recognition, not about power, but about partnership. Months passed since the scandal first broke, and now the headlines had changed, not because the world had suddenly grown kind, but because Lily and Julian had dared to face it together, hand in hand, without apology. The Evelyn Black Center stood proudly in the heart of the city, its glass walls a mirror to the future they had fought to protect. And across town, the scholarship nonprofit that Lily led had already sent its first 10 girls to college, every single one with a past that might have broken them, if not for the second chance they'd been given. Julian still ran his empire, sharper than ever, but different, more grounded, more aware of the lives behind every number, every project, every ambition. And Lily was now known not as a girl from a viral video, but as a founder, a mentor, a woman who took her pain and turned it into purpose. One evening, as they walked through the quiet halls of the center, their footsteps echoing against polished floors, Julian stopped beside a wall inscribed with names. The donors, the built believers, and next to Evelyn Black's name, a new one had been added in gold script, Lily Bennett. She stared at it, stunned, her breath catching, and he turned to her, brushing a hair from her cheek, saying softly, "You belong here not because of me, but because you carved this space with your own hands." And for the first time, she didn't doubt it. Outside, the rain had started to fall again, gentle, steady, the kind of rain that washed away more than dirt. It washed away memory, fear, shame. It left behind only what mattered. And as they stepped beneath the awning, Lily laughed, looking up at the sky, eyes bright, rain tapping against her skin. "I used to think love belonged to other people," she said, "the ones with better stories, better luck, softer pasts." And Julian shook his head, holding her closer. "No, love doesn't wait for perfection. It arrives when two people finally see each other without looking away." And she smiled, tears warm on her cheeks. "Then I saw you, and I never looked away again." They stood like that, beneath the rain and the city's golden glow, no longer billionaire and intern, no longer rumor and headline, but simply two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Because real love is not about who you were, it's about who you choose to be, again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And for every person watching, every woman who ever believed her mistakes disqualified her from something beautiful, every man who thought vulnerability made him weak, this was their story too. It was never about the scandal, the camera, the fall. It was about what they did after. They chose to love, and love, when it's real, when it's earned, doesn't care about the class you came from or the scars you carry. It only asks if you're willing to stand in the light, unashamed, and say, "This is me, and I choose you."